So our ECEs need to have knowledge of our own professional boundaries. We need to have knowledge about what dual relationships are and what the conflicts of interest might be in these relationships. So with professional boundaries, you're responsible that you're responsible as the RECE and not the parent for maintaining what a professional boundary looks like. Dual relationships could be with a family or a colleague or somebody you supervise, or a relationship addition to your, and it's a relationship in addition to your professional one, and conflicts of interest need to be understood, and what constitutes that conflict of interest and when do you need to declare that. So these are pieces of knowledge that we all need to understand as professionals. So let's talk a little bit about professional boundaries. You heard from the standard itself that RECEs hold positions of trust and responsibility for children under their care, and they understand the importance of maintaining professional boundaries with children, families, and colleagues. So if your boundaries aren't clear between yourself as a professional and your personal relationships, there could be consequences for the children or for a peer that you're working with or someone you're supervising with. So that little piece about the blurring what those boundaries could be between the RECE and the child or the family or each other, those are the parts that we need to be really understanding. How far is too far in a relationship, or how can I as a professional learn to separate those two things? I want to kind of give you something to think about, and when I started doing my own reflection, I thought about the statement, "What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas." However, as RECEs, what happens in Vegas and that might come back to our hometowns is something that we need to consider and what those boundaries look like. So we know and strongly believe as RECEs that relationships are the way that we build trust with each other and with our children and the parents. How Does Learning Happen speaks clearly about relationships and how we need to build those relationships. And then on the other hand, we think, oh, we have to have professional boundaries and we're not supposed to have relationships. We are absolutely not saying you're not to have relationships with people. We just need to know what those boundaries look like, and that we don't put children at risk in these relationships that we're building. So let's look at the types of dual relationships. So there could be, there's three types: familial, business, and personal. So with the familial, the RECE has a family relationship with someone in that workplace. Okay, so either my daughter works in the program that I work at, or I have a child that comes to our child care program. So I'm working sort of side by side, maybe not in the same room. Business, the RECE exchanges money or service with a child's family or a peer. So you're going to gain a benefit out of that, perhaps a financial benefit. So often we're asked to do respite work or to provide childcare in the evenings or on weekends for families to help support families. And there's personal. So the RECE has a friendship or a romantic relationship with a child's family member or a colleague or someone they supervise outside of the workplace. So if you think about the definition and the three types of dual relationships, in your poll question, you might think, oh, maybe that's changing because I do offer childcare in the evenings, or I do go to Vegas on a weekend. So it's important that we need to really think about what these dual relationships really look like in our own smaller communities and workplaces. So years ago, my daughter worked for another agency that supported special needs resourcing for our community, but she actually worked physically in the same program that I was leading. So it was difficult some days for me to be able to separate this being my daughter, or for her one day she called me Mom instead of Tracy. So it could be a little bit stressful. There's other relationships. I know of mothers and daughters and mothers and sons that work together in programs. Sisters work together in programs and in leadership roles. So this happens frequently. Again, it's understanding that one person might be in a higher leadership role, or maybe they work side by side each other, and what those relationships look like. With business, I said earlier, we often think about providing licensed childcare for families, or not licensed childcare, just childcare in the evenings, or we're doing some respite work to help support families. So that monetary piece is attached to that often. And personal, sometimes romantic relationships happen, and we need to identify what those are and communicate with people. So we'll get moving along a little bit and talk about what those dual relationships really look like and what to really consider in our thinking. So questions for reflection. How does my professional judgment play a role in my relationships? What are the risks of dual relationships? And how can I manage my dual relationship? So again, the college and myself as well, we're saying that dual relationships are fine. We just need to know what these boundaries are, and how our professional judgment plays a role, and what might those risks be, and how can I manage this so that everybody has a clear understanding of what those boundaries might be. An easy way to think about those questions is what if. So I often played the what if game with the children in our programs. What if you were walking home and a van drove up beside you? So put yourself back in the what if shoes and think about what some of those scenarios might be. How have I crossed the line? What if I enter into this relationship, this business relationship, and have some exchange of money? What if that family doesn't pay me, and then I have to see them tomorrow morning and they still haven't paid me, and what are my feelings going to be, and is my judgment going to be affected on the relationship that I have with the child the next day? So think about those questions for reflection in lots of the practice guidelines and the practice notes, and soon you'll be receiving a Try It at Work. There's lots of opportunities that Meredith talked about from the college resources for us to reflect together and to think about these questions, play those what if games with somebody who may be your mentor or a critical friend. So it's important to really think about what those look like. Okay? Professional judgment. So how does my professional judgment play a role in my relationships? There's 3 concepts that inform our professional judgment: ethical and professional standards, so we can never, ever, ever forget our code of ethics and standards of practice that we live into each and every day, our professional knowledge and our experience, and our reflective practice. So all 3 components of this make up this professional judgment that we need to consider in all of our what ifs and in our daily practice. We live in a fast-paced world, and it's easy to react and offer opinions and advice, and perhaps that's not our role sometimes, and we need to kind of slow down and take that time to really reflect. The biggest part of all of this piece in the judgment is questioning, are you putting the child or the family's best interest first? So this is our role and our responsibility to the College of ECE and to the children and families that we work with every day. When we think about professional knowledge and experience, I always think of it in two ways. Am I reacting to a situation, or am I responding to a situation? So I need to sit back and think about those relationships and how I'm really responding to them, or do I have this knee-jerk reaction and reacting to whatever is happening. So please take time to reflect on your own judgment and to figure out if you need to name it and share it with someone else. So one of the reasons why my CPL moved into really considering dual relationships was that I recognized that I had hundreds of dual relationships. I live in a really small town, so people know me. Our agency used to be called something else, and it rhymed with Tracy, so they often called me so-and-so Tracy. So people associated me with the agency where I worked, and I grew up in this very small town, so they knew me really well. So I had all these dual relationships, felt I was managing them well. I used good professional judgment. And then I had a situation where it really spoke to my heart, and I kind of was uneasy with that situation. Said, okay, how do I really keep on top of this, and how do I use this professional judgment and work on what I need to do so that the child at the end of the day is kept safe, and that I hold myself accountable to my profession. The other part of the dual relationship that I really want you to think about as well is not every dual relationship is the same. We don't, we have friends. We don't have the same kind of conversations we do with friends as we might with parents. We're going to talk about social media in a couple minutes. So that's another big piece of this, is to look at that piece about social media. So I want you to really take that time to think about your own dual relationships and your professional judgment and how that could impact the life and the joy in each children and family that you work with. Conflicts of interest. A conflict of interest can arise when an RECE has a personal or professional interest or obligation that could influence how they carry out their professional responsibilities. In the practice summary that's available online, they give a really good example. With a financial interest in keeping her weekend job, Jen's professional practice and relationships at the child care center might be influenced. She wants to maintain a positive business relationship with Holly's family. When Holly's parents arrive late for pickup, Jen doesn't charge them for their late fee. She's ignoring the late fee policy at the center that other families must adhere to. Her professional judgment has been impaired and is influencing how she carries out her responsibility to follow the workplace policies. So you can see that her professional business relationship has impacted the work that she does and following the procedures and policies that are at the workplace. So that's putting herself at risk, it's putting children at risk, it's setting other families up that how come that family doesn't have to follow those policies and procedures. So those are those conflicts of interest that we're speaking of. So do we bend our boundary because of our relationship outside of work? That's what a conflict of interest really is. It's bending that boundary. So your program, policies, and procedures should be your best friend. They help you stay on track. It helps you, if you want to use the word defend, if I could, saying that, you know what, I didn't write this, this is the policies. I'm not making these decisions, so it's not brought back onto the RECE if they have to have these difficult conversations that might seem difficult with families. But let's also consider the risks. So the risks in a dual relationships, you could have impaired judgment. There could be risk of harm to the child, risk of professional misconduct that's laid out in our legislation. There could be employment-related issues, failure to uphold workplace policies, relationship problems in your personal life, and the development of multiple dual relationships. So those could even grow more and more as you figure out and find out how people are related or how they can grow. So I'll give you a few examples of what that might look like. So with regards to impaired judgment, it may affect your decision making in your workplace. A good tool to consider is to reflect, assess, and reassess. So your practice decisions and behaviors really need to be looked at over and over and over again. The best practice would be to end your dual relationship if your professional judgment has been impaired. And I also would think that you should, if you could, communicate that with your supervisor of some sort so that everybody's under the understanding of what is going on, if that's possible. Risk of harm to a child. Even if it's unintentional, end the relationship if the potential of harm is a concern. Again, we need to communicate. We have an obligation. We have an obligation to our child abuse and neglect policies and that legislation, and to the College of ECE that we are to maintain the utmost safety for children. If we consider the RECE must establish and maintain clear and appropriate boundaries in professional relationships with children or our colleagues and families, the boundary violations may constitute professional misconduct. So we need to consider what those boundaries look like and if we are in contravention of that. Employment-related issues that could lead to miscommunication and stress or misunderstandings. So if you start to have these multiple relationships and you have trouble keeping stories straight, or people are just misunderstanding what those relationships look like, you're perceiving something as being a real friendship where others might perceive it as favoritism or lack of care for children. So you have to think about what perception looks like as well. Failure to uphold workplace policies. Lots of your programs have policies in place, social media policies or policies on your obligation to report child abuse and neglect. We need to really think about the risks that you have in your own profession if we aren't living into what those workplace policies are. Relationship problems in your personal life. You know, you need to consider, are you carrying those problems with you throughout your day, or are they staying at the door, and how are you handling yourself that way? And then the development of multiple dual relationships, we need to think about, you could have had a relationship with the peer working in the same playroom with you. And then all of a sudden your child comes to that child care program, and then your peer now has a relationship with that child, and now a new relationship forms with you, that you're both a parent and a co-worker with that other RECE. So you can see how these relationships kind of multiply depending on the circumstances that arises from that. So we need to think about consistency of policies and communication and transparency, and how important that is for everyone to really understand and communicate. So there's a beautiful chart, taking action and how can I manage my dual relationships. So you have to identify the facts. So this is right out of one of the practice guidelines. Identify the facts: who, what, where, when, and how. And then use your professional judgment. So look at what the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice are saying. Examine your own knowledge and your experience and consider what else I need to do. Engage in ongoing reflective practice. Talk to a critical friend. Reflect yourself. Document is really important. So communicate and document. Communication with others such as families and colleagues. And document steps taken to address the risks. You need to also be considering your own profession, that if someone else might report and question your own ethics, what does that look like, and what have you done to mitigate the risks that are associated with these relationships. And monitor, evaluate, assess, and regularly reassess those risks. So continuously taking time to look at, who, what, when, where, and how, and then reassess those risks to see if your mitigation plan has really helped. Again, opening those doors of communication and trust with your program supervisors or a peer or a mentor, a critical friend, so that you can have somebody else's perspective in sharing what those relationships might appear to be like with someone else. The other thing I thought about when I looked at this chart was we can't take our relationships for granted. They're very important, and they help build a solid foundation for our learning, but we also need to have the what ifs on the back burner. I was so surprised to see such a wide area of coverage from Thunder Bay down to Niagara and across the province on who's joining us this evening. So I want you to take some time to think about your own community. Are you rural or remote community, urban community? Do you have limited access to supports or connections outside of your program? Programs are designed to support specific religious, language, or cultural groups. So our relationships are also guided by the communities where we live and work. I used to have this thinking that, people were so much better off living in an urban community, and I call myself rural and remote, but I really am not. When I started to really investigate other communities farther north than we are here in Sudbury. But even in an urban community, people can feel isolated. They may also not have extended family that are around them. So they have built these strong relationships with the RECEs and the program, and they then extend them and say, oh, you know what, we have a wedding, and can you provide childcare for us this weekend? And that's how these relationships go. So it's grow. So it's really important to consider your community and the supports that families have. I had to really take time to stop and say, because I thought in my mind, don't provide, you can't provide childcare for families. Like, it's just a no-no, but it doesn't have to be that way. So I've learned a lot and broadened my own thinking about how relationships look and the relationships that form in our programs. So my own behavior was dictated by my community that I'm in right now, and now I need to look more at that. My behavior is really dictated, and that's not in a negative sense, by my Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice. So I truly believe that I try my best in living into what these Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice mean to my profession. From the chart, you saw reflect, assess, and reassess our policies and our procedures and our Code of Ethics and Standards, and we need to share and research and gain additional knowledge. And I strongly believe that this is where the CPL really holds us accountable to our profession, so that we can research and gain more knowledge and practice in coming on a webinar for the first time and really talking about things. So that reflective piece is so critical to our profession. And not only do we do it in understanding children's different languages, we need to really think about how it affects our own work and our practice. And then along came social media. So it's changing how we communicate in both personal and professional lives. RECs must consider the risks and benefits of using social media. We need to be reminded of setting professional boundaries when using social media. Online communication is consistent with the ethical and professional standards, and we need to really think about the policies of the workplace environments. So I want you to really take some time and also think about your social media contacts. I heard that a younger person in my family actually say, I nearly have 1,000 friends on Facebook. And I went, wow, that's a lot of friends. So I said, do you talk to all of these friends all the time? And how does that work? So our relationships are not only the face-to-face relationships that we have and how we need to look at what our social boundaries and professional boundaries look like. Those are carried into our social media parts of our lives as well. So we have both benefits and risks of social media. So we share information and research, and we discuss complex practices in our sector. We seek and give guidance. We obtain information about advocacy initiatives, sector and legislative changes, and we learn with and from diverse communities. But there's risks to all of this as well, and we just need to be aware of it. We're not saying you shouldn't use social media. I'm definitely not saying that, but our risks are about our profession and our accountability, confidentiality and information sharing, and that's both our peers and with our children and families, and the professional boundaries and dual relationships that we have. I'm not sure if there was a question, but if you could just think about how many different social media platforms that you do engage in, and do you really have enough control over those different platforms? Another thing that I've noticed is that do you identify yourself as the same person on those platforms, or are you using an alias? Once something is posted, it is not private information any longer. So it's public information. It doesn't matter what your privacy settings are set at. If someone else brings something out to the public, it's public information. So when you post, remember that it's not, everything isn't always private. Obtain consent, especially if you are talking about children and families that you're directly working with. Who's that post really designed for, and who else might view it? So stop and really think about that. Can the post negatively impact a child or family or colleague or your professional reputation or our profession as a whole? And remember that posts are instantaneous, they're widely shared, and they're often permanent. So think about social media with that acronym THINK, T-H-I-N-K. So T, is it true? H, is it helpful? I, is it inspiring? N, is it necessary? And K, is it kind? So pause and think about what you're posting and how someone is going to read that and you know, say, wow, that was quite inspiring, or that was really untrue. So we want you to invite your own thinking to think about what those posts are. A couple of years ago, someone I knew went to a job interview, and at the job interview, they said, you know what, we're just about ready to offer this position to you, and we would like to know if you would object to opening up your own Facebook page with us here. And this person did open his Facebook page, and he did share, and he felt he had nothing to hide. And then about a year later, a very young person related to me was talking about a job, and I knew what was on this young person's Facebook page because we're related. And I said, you know what, you really have to, you're older now and you're going to be looking for employment, and it's time that you really consider what your social media posts look like. So I said, here's an example. Could I take one of your pictures off of Instagram and frame it and put it in Grandma's living room? And she went, which one? And I said, that's what we need to consider. So think about our standards of practice, our code of ethics. Some of us have families who are now friends with us on social media. And what kind of impression are we leaving with families if they see us in images that may not be conducive to our professionalism? Did you know that employers also look at your social media? So often I'll say, I think I know this person from the resume that we receive, and the program supervisors that work alongside us says, oh yeah, she's a person on Facebook, da da da, and they'll show me who the person is. So if it's out there, people can find it. There's all kinds of resources that are here to help us remain professional and to keep children safe, and that are involved in healthy, respectful relationships, and we just need to ensure that this is how we are portraying those to be.